Tonight we're going to look at how the printed media presents scientific information, and if that's done in a credible manner. Right? Now, that may seem like a contradiction. When people think of science, they think of facts and truth. So you would think if you pick up, say, Discover or Omni off the newsstand, that this is automatically factual and full of truth. Okay? As we'll see, that may in fact not be the case. Right? Now to start looking at that, it would be interesting to begin with where these types of magazines get their information. Okay. The place they get their information from is from what are called the trade journals in science. Okay. These are magazines that are put out by scientists for scientists. They're called the scientific literature. Okay. For instance, this is a popular one called Cell. Okay. Then published weekly are these two, Nature and Science. Okay, these are like the Time and Newsweek of science. They contain original research. Okay, this is where scientists first publish their findings. This information is what eventually will end up in the kind of magazine that you get at the drugstore. Okay, now the question is what appears in this necessarily what appears in this? Okay, and that's what we'd like to look at. Okay, this type of information also appears in a more familiar form to you in this kind of second level publications like Scientific American and The Scientist. Okay, this is a little more issue oriented. This is more research oriented. These, however, are not available to you. This is a little over the head of a lot of people. Okay, it's extremely scientific. You have to have a very thorough background in science to really be able to understand this. So rather than go for these types of middle-level journals, you would tend to want to go for the more general science journal. Okay? And as we'll see, what's in here is not necessarily what originally appeared in here.
Hey, Professor, could you turn out the lights? Let's roll the film. Big science, hallelujah. Big science.
This research that appears in magazines like these trade journals doesn't appear unless it was funded. And the funding comes from Washington. So if the funding was not had, the research wasn't done and there were no publications. Okay? This turns into kind of a cycle where the scientists will apply for money. If they get it, they'll do the research and they'll publish, and the more they publish, the more money they can get the next time they go to Washington asking for it. Okay? The money supply is from the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, which you probably know has regularly been getting their funding cut by the Reagan administration. Okay? Now, that kind of leads to the fact that there isn't enough money to go around, so not everything gets funded. What does tend to get funded are what you would call the hot topics in science. Things like AIDS research get money. Things like solar energy research don't. Okay? Now, if the scientists can't get the money, they can't do the research, they can't publish, you'll never see it in here. Okay? So ultimately, what got in here was what got funded. And a lot of that is political. Okay? Scientists do review the grant applications and ultimately decide who gets what, but that is dictated politically, okay? It's not a pure scientific process. All right. Now, what got in here will get its first dissemination to the general public in here, okay? This you can pick up at the newsstand. This may not be your first choice if you don't have a good background in science, okay? This is also written by scientists. For instance, okay, well, this isn't it, but these articles are written by the people who actually do the research. So here's one on the emergence of animals by a well-known paleontologist, okay, who does the research. They try to write in such a way that you don't have to be a biochemist or a physicist to understand this, okay? But you do have to have a good science background. Now, since this journal tries to cover physics, chemistry, biology, the whole spectrum, they can only publish maybe one article per month in each broad topic, okay? Now, that leads to a very pick and choose journal every month, okay? They will narrow in on specific topics, and if you read this, you will not get an overall understanding of what's happening in science. You'll just get a good understanding of little bits and pieces of what's happening in science. So it's kind of science in a vacuum, okay? You do understand what's happening, but you don't get any kind of overview, and there's very little in the way of social comment here, okay? As I'll point out later, there's a very extensive article in here on third-generation nuclear weapons, but there's not a word in here about whether we should have third-generation nuclear weapons, okay? All right. Now, after that, we get into what most people would tend to pick up at the newsstand to read about science, namely these. These are the two leaders, really, Discover and Omni. These are more the general science magazines, okay? These are also a little bit pick and choose in terms of what they present, all right? In that, there are a few topics that appear over and over again, kind of at the exclusion of everything else, okay? And I'll run through them rather quickly here. Get everything together, okay? One of the hot topics that will show up in Omni or Discover are health and disease, okay? So AIDS research and cancer research, that type of thing, are frequent visitors, okay, to the pages of these magazines, all right? Another one that's hot is genetic research, so that you'll get articles on this one, light cast on a darkling gene, okay, about an eye disease that's been genetically linked. There's a big article on that in Discover, okay? Another hot topic, which I guess you would expect, since this is more a mass market type magazine, is sex, okay? And that's among human beings, amongst other primates. For instance, there's an article in this Discover about the genitalia of certain monkeys, okay? That's a hot topic. And any other animals, whatever, okay? Another topic would be nuclear weapons, which I'll get into more later, and that type of Star Wars technology, okay? Also psychology, and kind of pop psychology in particular, is a hot topic. Space technology used to be a hot topic until the Challenger blew up a year ago, and since then it's kind of been on the decline in terms of whether it will determine if somebody will pick up a magazine and buy it based on that. All right, it has started to come back as a topic. High technology, computers and robotics are very popular, as are consumer issues and product evaluation. For instance, just a month or two ago, there was a large article in Discover on salmonella. It must have been something you ate, okay, which focused on the poultry business, and you probably heard about that already, and how the chickens are getting us all sick, okay. In addition, a topic that's often covered but isn't really science, I call it kind of hoodoo, is things like Bigfoot, UFOs, and here in Omni, zombies. Made a large article in this issue. Okay? So these 9 or so topics appear over and over again. Okay? There's a concentration on them because they will sell magazines, but they are not representative of the whole spectrum of what's going on in science. Okay? Also, the content, as we'll see, does not necessarily reflect, even within that kind of narrow topic, the current state-of-the-art research in science, or even all of it. Okay? There's usually a little bias, one way or the other, towards the more kind of sensational aspect of the research. And again, that's because these people want to sell magazines. Okay? They are not as altruistic as, say, the trade journal that just wants to report things as it is. Okay? These have their subscriptions sold. Okay? They have their audience. These magazines do not necessarily. Okay? So, as we'll see, okay, find the article in here. Okay, as we'll see when we get back, there's a question about the content in terms of each topic that these magazines choose to present.
Everyone but the wealthy will be very filthy. In the future, everyone but the wealthy will be very healthy. In the future, TV will be so good that the printed word will function as an art form only. In the future, people with boring jobs will take pills to relieve the boredom. In the future, no one will live in cities. In the future, there will be many wars going on everywhere. In the future, everyone will think about love all the time. In the future, political and other decisions will be based completely on opinion polls. In the future, there will be a machine which will produce a religious experience in the user. In the future, there will be groups of wild people living in the wilderness. In the future, there will only be paper money, which will be personalized. In the future, there will be a classless society.
let's take a look at the content of these magazines. Okay. This is kind of the non-factual content, I guess. Okay, one thing that Discover and Omni both do, and Omni does this almost all the time, is they kind of present the infallibility of science as part and parcel of what they write. Okay, science will make our lives better, science is good, you know, science is wonderful, that type of thing. All right, now as a scientist, I would tend to agree, to be biased, but it's not true. All right, and there's proof galore of this. I mean, you can just look around and see things that science isn't going to cure. And in fact, scientists themselves are not the altruistic people that you would tend to think they are, all right, because of the pressure basically to get research funds, do research and publish. Okay, since without the publications, the money isn't there. Scientists have been known, in fact, quite recently, there was another spate of this, to actually make things up, which they then publish in these journals. Okay? When you make things up and publish in the trade journals, it's called fraud. And there's been a recent spate of fraud in this journal in particular, okay, just about a year ago, that led to a public retraction of data and pulling of funding from the NIH. And in the Scientist here, they interviewed the deputy director of the NIH. You can see he's a rather dour-looking man here. Okay, this is right after the latest fraud attack. Okay, so that even on the basic level here, science is not immune to perversion of the truth. Okay, if you want to put it that way. All right, this is only going to be more pronounced by the time you get to kind of the third level of science publications, namely Omni and Discover. Okay? They're very guilty of presenting the infallibility of science. Okay? New hope for juvenile diabetes sufferers. Yes and no. Okay? Was not an infallible new hope. Designer genes made to order animals. Okay? Not really. I mean, this sells the magazine, but that in fact is not really the case. Right? Now, you have to understand that they do cover a narrow topic range. And in doing so, they're going to automatically leave a lot of things out. Okay? Also, the writers who write these articles are pretty removed from science themselves. Okay? They don't do the research. They aren't involved in labs. And when they translate information from the trade journals or from a middle-level journal like this, they sometimes lose something in the translation. Okay? They are guilty of sins of omission, if you want to put it that way. All right. Now, in addition, they will take their own slant on certain topics. Okay, and let's look at a couple topics in particular. All right. AIDS has been published exhaustively over the last 2 years. All right. The trade journals themselves have had a lot of articles on AIDS research. It's been supported well with money from Washington, so there's been a lot of funded research, and a lot of it has made its way into these publications. Okay? In turn, since there is a trickle-down effect, journals like Scientific American have had a fair number of AIDS articles. In fact, Scientific American published 2 articles by Dr. Gallo from the NIH, who is an original AIDS researcher and has done most of the AIDS research in the US. Okay? Their coverage was very good. They went through the biology of the virus, different types of treatments, etc. They actually kind of got out of their science in a vacuum for those 2 AIDS articles. Okay? Now, in contrast, not really sharp contrast here, but Omni, a year ago, put on their front cover, How to Prevent AIDS. Okay? Now, automatically, you can see that they're taking a certain tact here. It's not so much all about AIDS, but kind of the guts of the issue, how to prevent AIDS, like how you can make sure you don't get AIDS. All right? Now, when you open this up to the article, in fact, it's an interview with Matilda Krim, who is an AIDS researcher, but going from the cover, How to Prevent AIDS, to this is not exactly what you would expect. In fact, when I opened this up, I thought I had the wrong place in the magazine, okay? But this is their article. This is how to prevent AIDS. It's an interview with Matilda Krim. Now, in fact, about 4 pages in to the article, she does start talking about AIDS, okay? But she starts out talking about something else. So this is slightly deceptive, okay? Not glaringly, but this is a commercial magazine they want to sell, okay? Then we go to Discover, which also had quite a lengthy article about AIDS. They're tagged, AIDS update, still no reason for hysteria. Again, kind of the guts of the issue. Are you going to get AIDS? All right, that tactic. Now, if the article had focused on that, that would have been fine. However, they didn't really. They went more into various sexual practices that would lead you to contract AIDS, and that was really the focus of the article. So there wasn't much here on the biology of the virus, etc. It was more on sex. So this was really kind of a sex article in disguise as a disease article, okay, which they do. They double up quite frequently on topics, all right? So overall, the most scientific presentation was in the trade journal, which you would expect, and it got a little less scientific as you went through Scientific American and then finally into Omni and Discover, okay? Now, another topic that all of these journals have treated is Star Wars, okay, Strategic Defense Initiative. And starting with the trade journal, Science, okay, this is just this month, March 27th, okay, so this is real current. Their article is Uncertainties in Building a Strategic Defense, okay? So their tactic is, how would we go about building Star Wars if we wanted to have Star Wars, okay? And this author goes through how we would go about obtaining Star Wars, all right? It is a long, involved process, which has a lot of problems with it, but he ends up saying we should have Star Wars, and we will have Star Wars in 10 to 20 years, okay? The main clinker is Star Wars won't work unless you can assure the survival of the population, meaning us, which you can't do unless there's a decrease in offensive weaponry. And he says that is the clinker in Star Wars, okay? It won't work if both sides keep building up nukes up to our armpits, okay? All right? However, he does come across as pro-Star Wars, finally, all right? Scientific American had a much scarier article on this. This one I showed you briefly before, third generation nuclear weapons. We're going to go from these where most of the destructive energy is wasted, more the pity, to these where it's very directed, as you can see, towards its target, okay? And this will be done from various vantage points, okay, from space, from land, from sea, from just about everywhere as they show you here, okay? This article doesn't get into whether this is appropriate, okay? This is income tax time. This is where some of your money is going. And that's basically what they say. Whether you like it or not, these things are being developed as we speak, okay? Finally, the scientist goes into the ethical question, should scientists do SDI research? And they said no, okay? However, only 60% said no, so Washington is managing to bribe some scientists, at least, into developing these weapons, okay? Discover's tactic is, how do we know the Russians aren't doing it, okay? We know they aren't because we can spy on them and make sure that they haven't got any more than what we've got. So this is their tactic. How do we make sure we can verify things like arms limitations? Now, this is very much a pro-Reagan type article, okay? They're going into the basic thing that we can't have arms agreements unless we can verify them, and we can verify them by satellites, etc. So this is their take on the Star Wars initiative.